And now we will move to the next speaker, who has this impossible first name.
Especially if you misspell it, then it's even worse to pronounce it.
So what is the right spelling?
It's Trvtko.
Trvtko.
No.
Trvtko. Okay. Your details have been also listed in the program, I think. And so I will hand you the floor.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I don't know, is it only me, but the acoustics in this room is not very good, so I'll try to speak up. Mic is just for the camera, but otherwise it's not very... maybe we can go to the other one. I might not need or not have time for the Balkan War, so I sent 3, maybe the Second World War. So, if there is another mic for the audience, that might help. I didn't hear you that well, but this is what we have. Anyhow...
we move closer? Is that, can you hear us properly in the end? You have no problem.
Okay, maybe it's only me.
Maybe talk slowly and
I said not the Balkan Wars, go to the Second World War. My name is Trvtko. Trvtko was a medieval king of Bosnia, and when I was born it was simply a custom to give names after medieval rulers in Croatia. So this is one of rare names, or more rare than the others, but Tvrd means hard. In Christianity there is Firmin, who is one of the saints. I guess that was how it evolved, but I was named after a king of Bosnia, no, not Bosnian, but when I was born. I will give you an overview and maybe just point to some of the things that were said. One, that Croatia was part of the Ottoman Empire, which is just partially true, or 2/3 of Croatian lands were part of the Ottoman Empire. Maybe in this context is worth mentioning that mostly all of our historiography until the beginning of the 90s, and the same works for historiographies of all other countries in Southeastern Europe, were built in the opposition to everything that the Ottomans represented and were. And that goes for all Romantic literature and everything that was created. These things have slowly started to change in the 80s, depending of the authors or individuals. I can give you an example. I was born in a city that is some 150 kilometers to the west of Ilok, which was a seat of Požega Sanjak, and some of the local authors who were established already in Zagreb were talking that not everything was bad, and that some of the logic how the Ottomans were following the rivers and the hills around the city were more natural and something that we should appreciate, as well as non-destruction of the monuments that were used during the Ottoman period, as opposed to everything or almost everything that you can see in the Christian lands once the Ottomans were expelled. So if you are going to visit Serbia next year, you will hardly see anything from the Ottoman period. Here in Ilok you have a couple of 2 things that are from, or 3 from the Ottoman period here in the space. That is something probably worth mentioning and not very common in spite of 150 years of the Ottoman rule in 2/3 of what was Croatia or Croatian lands, or what are Croatian lands today. However, as I said, our historiography was mostly concentrated on the parts that were not part of the Ottoman Empire, but were part of the Austro-Hungarian or Habsburg until second half of 19th century Habsburg Empire. This is not what I deal with. I'm primarily a Cold War historian, and I teach 20th century world history, and therefore I will mention that in 2 weeks' time in Zagreb there will be an exhibition co-organized by the Croatian Turkish Society of the pictures from 1954 when President Tito went to Istanbul and Ankara to forge the Balkan Treaty, or the military part of the Balkan Treaty between Greece, Yugoslavia, and Turkey was signed already in 1953. In 1954, that treaty between one socialist country and two NATO countries was signed because of the things I can maybe explain, but these photos that were taken by one Croatian, there were more, of course, but Croatian photographer Milan Pavic, whose pictures they are going to present, extremely interesting because he took photos of the Istanbul in 1954 on the margins of the conference, so together with the other official photos. And these are photos of the Istanbul you don't see very often, and especially not taken by Milan Pavic. So that's in 2 weeks' time. 54 is a very important year for us in general, and I can talk about that because finally the borders between Yugoslavia and Italy were, the agreement was reached in 1954 by the London Memoranda, forced by the Americans and the British, primarily upon the Italians, to finally agree to what you have not here, but that's not helping. If you could just find, and then go to I sent 3, not this one at all. So I sent 3, maybe the last one, then the Chile one. I'll start with the picture. Anyhow, the border between Italy and Yugoslavia in 1954. This is what you see on the map between Slovenia, Croatia, and Italy today. That was finally reached in 1954, and that is partially connected with the Balkan Treaty that Yugoslavia signed with Greece and Turkey. But that's maybe a story I don't want to expand right now. So if we return to the beginning of 20th century, this part of southeastern Europe, I mentioned that in almost equally as Croats would be too sensitive to, especially until a couple of decades ago, to saying anything positive vis-a-vis or about the Ottomans, equally sensitive until today they would be, especially some, they would be if you would mention that Croatia is part of the Balkans. That is another story also connected with the Ottomans. So I will say that this part of southeastern Europe, which is Vojvodina also, and this part was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire until 1918. And in 1918, the borders dramatically changed with the end of the Great War, which did not touch Croatian lands per se. So there were no battles on anything that is Croatia today. However, the majority of, when you take the percentage of South Slavs in Austria-Hungary, they were disproportionately participating in the Austro-Hungarian troops on several battlefields. The most important one for the Austro-Hungarian monarchy anyhow was the Sonzo or the Socha front between Italy and Austria-Hungary. Then it was, of course, was Galicia and what would be eastern front in Russia, and you had the first one, the beginning of the Great War, the front between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, with the attack of Austro-Hungarian troops on Serbia in summer of 1918. However, something that I always ask my students about, and for you coming from the lowlands, it's probably in spite of Netherlands being neutral, you know, globally, how do we commemorate there? What do we take as the beginning of the Great War, where the presidents and the kings are going every 5 or 10 or every year, you know, they go to Belgium, they do not come here, you know, although the Great War have started between what is now border between Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is also another story. In 1918, the borders were redefined, and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was founded, which lasted until 1939, mostly unchanged. Then in 1939, there was an agreement between the two largest nations in the monarchy, the Serbs and the Croats, and the so-called Banovina Croatia was formed within the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which had autonomy that didn't exist prior hand to, or not since 1918 for sure. But that was almost a stillborn, because the agreement between the Prince Paul and leaders of the Croatian Peasant Party in 1939. The agreement was reached just a couple of weeks before the beginning of the Second World War, with the German attack on Poland. And although a politician that would be today described as a relatively talented and positive one, the Prince Paul of the Karađorđević dynasty, and there is the whole attempt to rehabilitate him in a way, was futile in any case, because in 1941 Yugoslavia was one of the last countries to be attacked by the German, Italian, Bulgarian troops, Hungarian troops, and country that ceased to exist in 12 days. Prior to that, the idea of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who writes about that, was that at the time of peril, and Britain was at that time the only one fighting the Germans, even small nations have a duty to perform or to fight or to resist. And his idea was to buy time for as long as it takes for the Americans to finally decide to join, forcing or trying to lure Turks, Yugoslavs, and Greeks, who were in another position, to participate, to start a resistance against the Germans. That's why, and I'm not dwelling into that, that's why the Turks got that little part of what is seemingly missing from the Syrian, Alexandretta, and that part which is seemingly missing from the Syrian coastline. If you remember the map, you know, where the referenda was held, and part that was voted to become part of the Turkish Republic, hoping that the Turks will finally decide to join the war on the side of the Western powers, you know, and then for a while, together with the Yugoslavs, you know, and Greeks form a bloc fighting against the Germans. And trying to give a little bit more breath to the British. That didn't happen. there was a coup in Yugoslavia in March, April of 1941, and after that Yugoslavia ceased to exist. That would be much easier if I could show you the map of Southeastern or Europe at that time, and you had country that was dismembered. Ilok, if you want me to return to that, which at the beginning of 20th century was part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, relatively far from borders of other countries, was then part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and then became part of the so-called independent state of Croatia, which after the Germans came was part of the puppet regime that was established in Croatia in 1941. That, however, ceased to exist as far as Ilok is concerned, and you have a monument some 150 meters from here dedicated to those who were killed in 1944 and 45 when the front was pushed partially by the Soviets and the Yugoslav partisans, the Soviets were pressing towards the north, trying to reach Berlin as fast as possible, leaving the west of the country still as it was, so under the German or the Ustasha rule. That's why you have that half of Yugoslavia was under the German rule, being squeezed from both sides. You know how it went. So Croatia was de facto the last Hitler's ally in the Second World War, because Zagreb was liberated on the 8th of May, 1945, very late, because the German forces were being pushed and pushed and pushed, and that little stretch of land remained from the north, from the Baltic or the North Sea, all the way to the head of the Adriatic. That's Tito with Churchill. However, the border to the north was a crucial one, and because you are here going to, so in 1944, in 44 already, this part of what was Yugoslavia was already liberated or taken. Tito went to Belgrade already and was in Belgrade in October 1944. But this part stayed with the independent state of Croatia or with the Germans until, as I said, May of 1945, the whole year. These forces that were fighting here partially came from Bulgaria and went here, were the Soviets together with the partisans. That's why there is a monument to the Soviets here, being taken care by the Russian embassy, 1067, as I read this morning. This is my first visit to Ilok, by the way, so I discovered that this morning. When Yugoslav partisans or Tito, when they were levying soldiers from this part of the country to fight, Macedonians, for instance, that's the first instance of Macedonian self-conscience, in a way, said, well, no, we would rather go to fight for Thessaloniki, which might be interesting for all of you from the Sultans Trails, Thessaloniki is a historical harbor for Macedonian lands. We will rather go there and not to fight for Trieste, as they said. They were not being sent to Trieste at that time, but used to press the border here in Srem, in Vojvodina. And as you can see, or you will see, this part of Danube is much higher than the Vojvodina part, So that's why the Germans have fortified here, and frankly, without the Red Army artillery, would have been almost impossible to press and destroy. So that's why it went like this, The Soviets went, but they went to Hungary, leaving the rest to the Yugoslav partisans. So for Ilok, that was basically the end. And for this part of the Sultan Trails, that was basically the end already in 1944. But for this part, or the western part of Yugoslavia, the main or the most bloodiest battles only remained because Tito's idea was to take lands that were perceived or dreamed of by the Slovenes and the Croatians. Yugoslav partisans had the support of the Western allies, primarily the British, who were traditionally responsible for this part of the world. But the Western idea was the border between the Kingdom of Italy and the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which would not include Istria, Rijeka, Fiume, and most of the islands, together with Zadar. Zadar was already evacuated in 1943, emptied city, Tito's idea was a little bit different, to press there, and that's why Rijeka, for instance, which is now the third largest city in Croatia, was taken by the partisans only on the 3rd of May, 1945, but Trieste, by the Slovenian and other partisan groups already on the 1st of May, 1945. The idea was to take those lands that were seemed to be Slovenian or Trieste, not Croatian, but others in Istria, Croatian lands. And these borders were achieved. Yugoslav partisans who were the first to enter Trieste were pushed 40 days later from the city. You had that A zone and zone A and zone B, or the free territory of Trieste, which was a stillborn. That's now too many details. But however, it took 9 years for the border finally to be settled, and that was, as I said, achieved in 1954 by the joint work of British and American diplomacy, and Yugoslav and Italian ambassadors in London, who were not negotiating directly, but through the British and the Americans. Yugoslav ambassador was one of our most capable ambassadors. I prepared biography of Vladimir Velebit was his name. He was a famous family, the third general in his family. And he was Tito's general. His father was general in the old Yugoslavia, and his grandfather was general in the Austro-Hungarian army, which, for all of you coming from the Netherlands, give you the idea of the change of borders and the change of lands and the change of money and the change of systems and the change of laws and instability, which is a little bit different here than it is in many of the Western parts of Europe. With the founding of Yugoslavia. Now I would love that Chile presentation, if that's possible, the last one, but maybe we can live with that. Yugoslavia, then in 1945, with their own forces, and without, except this assistance in this part of Yugoslavia, Soviet assistance, established the closest and most similar regime to the Soviet Union already in 1945. And unlike Bulgaria, where the emperor stayed until 1946, or Romania, where the king stayed in 1947, or Czechoslovakia, where the multi-party government was until February 1948, with Tito, that was all finished by late 1945. However, all that changed only 2.5 years later with the Tito-Stalin split in 1948, which became one of our founding myths or stones or cornerstones of the identity of the country that was established in 1945. So you had the victory in the Second World War, which is very common for so many countries participating in the Second World War in different ways. You know, just think of the coat of arms of the city of Amsterdam, for instance. Then you have Tito as a leader and the absolute unquestionable ruler who was personally 20 years older than most of his people closest to him. So he was even in that way more senior to all the others. And then you got in 1948 two others. One was that fear and fact that Yugoslavia was not part of the Soviet world any longer, that Yugoslavia was not participating or not on the other side of the Iron Curtain, but didn't want or couldn't, that's another story, join the West, So what they had to find out or to create better, because Yugoslav system, socialist system, was a creation de facto. They claimed that they returned to the young Marx, and that in young Marx they found certain works that could explain a socialist self-management, which was a Yugoslav system. But de facto that was our creation. Why? To simply find a way ideologically how to remain socialist with one party, one leader, and so on, and nevertheless being able to cooperate with the West, and nevertheless being able to receive assistance from the West, and nevertheless to have open borders, because in 1954, for instance, when the border was settled between Italy, you had no border, especially for the people from Istria. They had a special permission to walk like they used to walk before there was no border, which was unique in the socialist system in any socialist country, that the border was totally open. So you had that, and that myth of socialist self-management, Tito, Second World War, split with the Soviets, and then a latecomer, which is something I deal with, that is...
Can you make more connection with Sultan?
I will. I'm coming, because I started with that, madam, with 1954 and the visit of Tito to Turkey and the visit of the Turkish president but I'm not an Osmanist, and that was the point, that I'm not dealing with the Ottoman history. For the Ottoman history, you need to have an expert on the Ottoman history. There are experts on Ottoman history at the University of Zagreb after 1990, and I'm heading to that, and I will explain why there are many more in Zagreb after 1990 and not before 1990. So you had a non-alignment which came in 1961. Another war, or the last war, was the war of the 90s with the breakup of Yugoslavia. At that time, we didn't have Ottoman studies or Turkish language at the University of Zagreb, or nowhere in Croatia. However, with the beginning of the war in Sarajevo, in Bosnia, many of the experts from Bosnia came to Croatia, and they actually established our Ottoman studies. And now we are relatively decent, I would say, with a department with several of younger scholars dealing with that part of Croatian history in a way that would be, I would say, more balanced, and that was not what we used to have in the romanticized approach to 19th century, one heroic and so on of the 19th century and early 20th century historiography. And not only 20th century, early 20th century, that was a historiography we had until recently, relatively. So these things have Turkey Turkey was one of the rare exceptions in Croatian foreign policy during the 90s. Turkish and Croatian relations remained relatively good, or very good, I would say, in spite of the problems Croatia had in Bosnia-Herzegovina, or Croatian involvement in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatian Muslim war, or Croatian Bosniak war in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Relations with Turkey remained good. I would say that whoever was responsible for that, either our ambassadors there, but that was a positive thing, I think, or both on the side of the Turks, I would say. Now we got a new ambassador of Turkey. She served in Trinidad and Tobago before. There are other stories about ambassadors who were being put in a bag and taken to, that's not true, by the way, but that was a rumor in Zagreb, because that ambassador simply disappeared overnight. So someone said he was put in a bag and taken to Bosnia and then shipped to Istanbul. Not true. I checked that with people who know, though he is not working in the ministry any longer, but that did not happen, you know. So those were the problems now, but these problems are emanating from something that was an attempted coup in Turkey, and a failed opportunity by the European Union to be more open vis-à-vis Turkish Republic, which was especially during the Cold War, very cooperative, below what they, similar to Germany. You know, they behaved much better, not using its strength, which was always higher than they showed, I guess. That is all gone. You know, now you have different Turkey that opened so many new embassies, which is with their forces present in Qatar, in Libya, in Syria, in Azerbaijan, and you know, with investments in different Southeast European countries and so on. So that is for European Union, that was missed opportunity, and that's another story, what could have been done, because Croatia and Turkey were the same at the beginning. We started negotiations for the European Union together. Croatia was 10 years late. Yeah? Croatia joined European Union 10 years after the last countries who had joined European Union. You know, was the only one to join in 2013. You know, that was extremely late for Croatia, and with these words I will finish. But Turkey totally changed its path and rediscovered its middle power size, and more than a middle power, being present militarily and with, I don't know, the vaccine for COVID and so on in so many different countries. So that is another story than it was at the beginning of the century and the beginning of the Cold War, and even at the end of the Cold War and this era. Croatia was hard hit by the war. This part of Croatia was especially hard hit by the war of the 90s. People who lived here were expelled. Croats were expelled from not only from Ilok, which is a tiny town, but especially Vukovar, which suffered the most, almost totally demolished the city, not far from Ilok and the seat of municipality here. However, one of the things that I would personally stress much more was the mission of, I will say now, General Klein, in spite of Klein's preferences, and the whole UN mission, which was a successful one. Unlike most others in the history of mankind, that was a positive one and a successful one. Since Croatia similar like Yugoslavia, is not using these examples as the founding myths, but the victimhood and the victory. We cannot really stress a peaceful reunification as a positive and fruitful beginning or the element for the future. So this is what we have. Unfortunately, however, when all other countries, Slovenia, Czech Republic and so on, joined European Union, Croatia remained, and you will see that here if you want, the last Western Christian country. I'm not stressing the religious monument here, element here, but it is the last Catholic country you leave, and then you have to go all the way to the Philippines to reach another one. Why am I saying that? It was mentally for Croatians who didn't want to have anything with the Balkans, you know. That was impossible to bear, impossible to bear. So last time when we had a consensus in our society between different political groups, that was when we were trying to become member of the European Union, you know. And we joined in 2013. These couple of years before we joined European Union were probably the best years of Croatia, of the independent Republic of Croatia, where there was optimism and we seemed to be changing and the society was changing and there was a cooperation in a sense that we at least have certain common goals to reach. And then we managed to reach in 2000 or become the member in 2013. In the meantime, we became members of Schengen and became members of the Eurozone, all positive things, and always there where there is interest of other countries, we are relatively successful. So, in us joining Schengen, that was the interest of you and the Germans to protect the border, you know. Croatian police today is being sometimes accused of being relatively harsh vis-à-vis those illegal immigrants. However, we know that zero would remain in Croatia if we would let them go. Yeah? So what we do for the rest of the European Union. Plus Schengen and all that was very important for all of others who own property in Croatia or were willing to use mobile phones, because roaming was very expensive and it was much easier to pay with Schengen when you have more than 1 million Slovenes coming, half of a country, coming to Croatia every summer, you know, and so many Germans via car destination. That's very important. It's easy to reach. So these things helped. These things helped. However, there were many other problems that we haven't even tackled, and that can be for some other lecture. In the conclusion, other countries along the Sultan Trail who are not members of the European Union would probably, it would be probably useful to see them as a place for consolidation of European Union. Not the extension, consolidation. And that would help everyone. That's not going to happen. Not only because in some of these countries, like Serbia, there is no willingness by the majority of population to join European Union, but there is no willingness of many of the Western European countries to accept new members. So that is in a far future. In the meantime, these lands emptied. So when you walk around this city and this part of Croatia, or part of the Croatia where I was born, we lost in the past 30-something years up to 45% of the population. In 10 years' time, those who are very old will probably be gone, and it's going to be even worse. And that's the problem. And that's the problem for us, and that's the problem for European Union in general. But that is, unfortunately, the trend. And the trend is not only Croatia, although in Croatia is one of the worst, not only for the EU countries, but for other countries. Yeah? And we do not have politicians, nowhere, especially not in Brussels, who will be able to confront what we will see in 2 weeks' time after the elections in the United States, and in general with all the problems that this world has today. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Well, you gave a wide range of views, and it's almost like a Pandora box that you opened, because we can fight over and discuss quite a few of these issues. Let me just kick off one thing, because I've spent considerable time in Croatia, in fact in all countries here in this part of the world, and I have come to the conclusion that the only or the best possible way to overcome the old hostilities and the animosities, which are still very vivid, as you know, that is Croatian versus Serbian, Serbs versus the Albanians, is probably to overlay it all with a European cloak, as it were. That only a European perspective, a joint membership of that common body would help to overcome these long-grown, long-rooted animosities. So I would like to have your opinion, how you see the evolvement of these historic animosities, as there have been, no doubt, particularly Albanians, Serbs, but also Croats, Serbs and Bosniaks, the whole mix. How can we possibly, and it's in the spirit of the Sultans Trail, how can we help to smooth the relationship, to have less of prejudices versus each other? Because it's still, Croatia is being difficult about Serbian joining the EU. You're not being very helpful, what I have heard. You say there is no willingness in the population of Serbia to join the EU. I would dispute that. I think there is everyone in Serbia, what I can see and speak, is looking west. If they send their kids abroad, they go to Germany or Holland or America. If they go on holidays, preferred destinations are all the rest. No one I have seen, and I've asked many, is going to Moscow. Although there is a so-called pro-Russian sentiment. There is Orthodox solidarity, obviously, but when it comes to a political choice, I doubt there is anyone or a sizable group that wants to not join Europe. They feel it's being made difficult, partly by their former brothers who are being difficult and blocking the access. So my question is to you, in the spirit of the Sultans Trail, how can we contribute to a better exchange, better understanding between these different ethnic nations in this part of the world? Because it seems to be very pernicious, and I have personally tried. I was involved in Kosovo, where we had the problem of integrating the northern Serbs in North Kosovo into Kosovo, an independent Kosovo, and we tried everything we could, including over proportion in the parliament and special seats and special privileges. Nothing worked because Belgrade simply helped to steer resentment and opposition. So any attempt, fair-handed, to try to bring it together for a larger common good failed. So what is the solution to this almost inbred opposition? Can you
This short, or?
Yeah. Sorry. I'm sorry, but this is a thing that has been bothering me for many years.
No, you're right. Of course, that if you go to Belgrade, everybody goes to do shopping abroad in the West and send kids in the West and migrate to the West, and that's clear. It's been always like that, always. In the same way as wars between different South Slavs are not so old and not so common and not so historically something that you can easily prove historically. So before Yugoslavia, there were very few wars between different South Slavs, if any.
Except Albanians and Serbs.
Albanians are not Slavs.
Yeah, but yeah, still okay. But it's part of
South Europeans.
True. Yeah. So that is true. I'll tell you. It would be obviously a very long answer. Returning to what is part of my topic or what is part of my research. Just imagine in 1948 when Yugoslavia split with the Soviets, how hard it was. It was probably with a superpower, all those allies at the borders. With the majority of people who, 1/3 of the party members who sided with Stalin. 1/3 of the party members, and many people who simply, wanted to have good relations with Russia, and so that was an extremely important step, and it's no wonder why the West seized the opportunity and assisted Tito, and why it kept Tito afloat, as the phrase was. First of all. That the majority of people is not interested in becoming a member. It's not what I say or what I feel, but what the polls have been saying. So that's one thing. Officially, it is the position of Serbia to join the European Union, but in many practical ways there are many problems. And I can assure you that if not the Netherlands, East European countries, of former Soviet allies are not going to vote now. You don't need Croatia to stop. Croatia lost its opportunity when we joined the European Union to use our strongest asset, and that is we have the same language, we know the space, we can assist. That's what we were telling in Brussels, that we will be doing. We will be a bridge to bring these countries to European Union. And there are other countries like Macedonia or the Kosovars or Montenegro where relations were not so tense or less tense than with Serbia per se. Didn't happen. Question for all Croats here. I got it from Danish ambassador recently. Who are our allies? Which country is Croatian ally and not the United States? We can't answer that question very easily. Slovenes? Well, they are not. Not only because we have a border dispute, but because we are not. Who are going to be our allies tomorrow if Montenegro and Serbia join the European Union? It would be logical to say, well, there is a block of countries voting like the Benelux countries or the Nordic countries, that they have common interests or common understanding and stuff. Well, we don't have that. We do not work on that. Not only not in the spirit of the Sultans Trails, but in general, it's not good for our diplomacy. Different nationalisms. Serbian and Croatian nationalisms are different nationalisms. Serbian nationalism says, you feel as a Serb, come, join, you will be accepted. In Croatian case, if you are not following a certain line, then we rather live without you, and even without parts of you, So could we use some of the Tito's heritage? I would say yes. I'll tell you one example. If you go to Macedonia, Macedonian Philharmonic Orchestra, Faculty of Philosophy, hospitals, all Croats who were sent as a punishment after the Second World War. Philharmonic Orchestra in in Cairo, Egyptians didn't have Philharmonic Orchestra. Who was sent? Josip Klima was sent, Melita Lorkovic was sent, other Yugoslavs were sent. What I would do, I would organize a concert every 2 years of Zagreb Philharmonic Orchestra going to Cairo to perform. But that was Tito's heritage. We don't want to use Tito's heritage. So that is a rare country where we do not use even the victory in the Second World War. We do not. How many articles were published on 1954 and successful solving of the border between Yugoslavia and Italy? 0 in Croatia, many in Slovenia. Why? You cannot be positive vis-à-vis Tito. Since you cannot be positive and you cannot criticize, we rather don't touch that. So that's a rare case. That's different type of nationalism. Nationalism that excludes, nationalism that is afraid. Yeah? In Serbia is different. However, we cannot follow what was in Yugoslavia, mixed marriages. People lived together, That was one of the mantras in Yugoslavia. So many people, mothers, fathers, didn't work. That didn't work, So that is not the way. And I think that we shouldn't be, but the problem is when you have that type of nationalism that is not even pragmatic, That's the problem. On the state level, that's how we simply, want it to be. That was our foundations of our nationalism. And that's why we have that kind of, that's why I mentioned the peaceful reintegration, No, we will have Vukovar and the suffering now as the national holiday, which was taken by this government as a national holiday, #1. And in summer you have a victory in Knin. And these two, what is good for nationalism, especially the victimhood, and then you have a victory. And between these two we play. Every year you have a commemoration of different battles, events and stuff like that. Our war of the 90s is still alive. Still alive. In Yugoslav times, Tito wasn't celebrating his victories every year, not even every 5 years, but every 10 years. And now we have every year, every battle. You cannot calm the situation down. We want that. And then that is, like this to the Serbs. But that is the way how we operate. There are no different nationalisms.
So we will not solve the problem and to overcome the differences.
Oh, Mike. On the state level.
Not on the state level, because the states, they have their own agendas. They are very nationalist, they're very negative. So we can overcome on the cultural level, on the level of the local communities, on the level of projects, local communities project, not on the state level, because states are, we know what are states. States are not good. I would quote Marx, which I believe the definition is very true. State is an instrument of oppression. And so I don't think that states can solve the problem. They will make it deeper. They will stick to that differences, which we know that they are not big, they were not big. Politicians may make wars, not people. So on the local level, I think projects that would connect the local communities on the different countries now, and I mean this building bridges, metaphorical and material, That's my opinion. I wouldn't trust states. Thank you. Thanks.
Aren't we here for the Sultans Trail? I mean, that can be the end of all the talking, I think. We are here to try to bring peace in all those 8 countries, to pass by them, to talk to the people, to connect everybody. So that's one part also, why we are here together. Let me use an opportunity.
wish to share two my thoughts. First is successful mission from UN for this east part of Croatia. Don't forget that non-governmental organization, peace activists and civil society did big job and UN supported that. So don't forget it, that citizens did a lot of work. And second is that if we are talking about local level and politicians level, probably if we will like to build the bridge, we will need political decision. But if we are talking about people, I can remember we had Dutch visit from Suriname girls in small village here, and children were touching their black skin, asking, is it paint or is it real? So if we allow people to travel and to see the enemy and the other side, we do a lot of job, and therefore I support this trail very much.
May I just add one thing? Just one thing? Yeah, concerning the reconciliation, something. I have an impression that our celebration of 5th of August, Victory Day, the Croatian nationalists are very sad that we got so easy that victory. So that the victory was not a catharsis equal to what we suffered in '91. So that's very strange, and I think that Croatians and Serbs could be seen as two football teams. You need constant tension, at least for the Croatian part, I can say, because that's kind of legitimation of the nationalism that was brought by that. So we have to attack the narrative, and it's not our war was not inductive; it was deductive. It was organized. It was not spontaneous, and that's the key. If it was organized by the state, and it was organized by the state, by Belgrade, then it should be addressed in that sense. That's my opinion about it.
Yeah, just a short remark. Croatian nationalism is a nationalism of fear. We are afraid, and that's why when you are a little bit insecure, I'm telling that for many years, that's not where I read something. You are afraid a little bit, you are afraid of different things, that's why is this. We won in 1995. Won, and we joined the European Union. So we are in much better position to say, okay, let's do some things. Could we maybe show a little bit a pragmatic self-interest in this way, and that's not my phrase. American foreign policy before Trump was described as a pragmatic self-interest. Politicians are maybe a problem, but in a country where everything is being decided and ruled by one party and one man inside that party, it's extremely impossible, hard to do anything on your own. One gesture of our former prime minister when he congratulated Christmas to the Serbian Orthodox community with traditional Serbian formulas at that time helped to ease tensions. 10 years in 10 seconds were eased. That's why politics is important. And that's why politics is important in this society, where no one can decide anything without having a blessing from above. Nowhere, in school, anywhere. That's the problem. And that's why it's important. And we do not have that. And we cannot have that. Because that's the ideology of the ruling party, or those groups supporting ruling party, or those who have interest in a country, ask them, is there any factory in this part of Croatia? Do you produce anything in this part of Croatia? You don't. Everybody works for the state. Everybody depends on the state. Why not?
No, wine.
Wine. Wine.
Okay, I think we have to break, but let's keep in mind that this fervent, virulent nationalism is a real problem. And it reminds me of that famous saying that nationalism is the refuge of scoundrels. Those who are insecure or want to hang on to power, they promote the nationalism. They thrive on nationalism. And the people-to-people level, as you mentioned, that's where we can break through. And so that's a very important message, which is very much embodied in the Sultans Trail philosophy, obviously. So we are going for a break. Half an hour, Tom, is that all right?